Okay, I think we're going to get started. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on true centralization. We're going to be discussing how you can integrate the value of Affinity across your databases and workflows. We're going to talk about use cases that you can build on top of Affinity, as well as how you can leverage the API and some of the tech stacks that we've put together at OMERS and SpeedInvest. I'm Dominique Simno-Ritchie. I'm thrilled to be chatting with you today about APIs and the ecosystems that they enable. It's something that I hold very close to my heart. Every single role in every company I've worked with, I have helped build our integrations and APIs platforms from the ground up. One of those companies now has 13,000 apps, and maybe more importantly, for VC firms like yourselves, access to second-party developers who can help them with custom solutions. Another place that I worked at now, we built up over 300 out-of-the-box integrations, up 300% from when I joined, making it super easy to add more so that we were constantly adding more to make it easy for firms that might not have engineering counterparts to be able to do this. And so I'm looking forward to building on that success at Affinity. And then today, I'm excited to introduce two great customers who are going to share how they've successfully enabled key use cases for their flows by integrating into Affinity or with Affinity. The first is Dan Brown. He's head of product with SpeedInvest. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Great to be here, of course. So I'm the head of product at SpeedInvest. What that means is I'm responsible for our online experiences to help our portfolio companies succeed. I'll be telling you a little bit about some of the use cases we have here. My background, I'm not a software engineer. My background is product marketing and product management, more product management than ever. Some small companies, some big companies.
And what about SpeedInvest?
Oh, okay. SpeedInvest is a European seed stage venture fund that has 1.2 billion under management. So it's fairly large in terms of seed stage investors. We do about 50 deals a year. And we've got 70 seats of Affinity. So this is large enough that online experiences really help us understand and bring our whole company to bear for our portfolio companies.
Awesome. Casey, do you want to introduce yourself? So we've got Casey Rovinelli. He's a partner in data and technology at OMERS.
Yes, happy. You picked us. Thanks for coming, everybody. This is really good. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm Casey. So I'm a partner at data technology. What that really means is it sounds highfalutin. It's just me and a developer, basically. But we run the data and technology, all the data-driven sourcing and internal tooling for OMERS Ventures. In a past life, I've been similar to Dan, a product marketer. Worked at sort of early days eBay, E-Trade, ran direct-to-consumer for Virgin Mobile, did a stint in hockey, if anybody's interested in that. Yeah. I got stories of the lockdown and when I worked at the NHLPA. And then OMERS. OMERS Ventures is a direct venture. We're a direct venture investor affiliated with OMERS, the large Canadian pension fund. It's kind of like CalPERS with a Canadian accent, I guess, is kind of how you think about OMERS. Early stage investor, lots of software. We have about 70 portfolio companies, 50 Affinity seats. The reason you see me down here so much is we have an office in Palo Alto, but we're also in Toronto, New York. And some of our notable investments were Shopify, Contentful, and fun fact, Affinity as well. We had a company in Toronto that we invested in called Nudge that Affinity purchased a development team. And so that's why a lot of the what do you guys call yourselves? Affinites?
Affinians.
Affinians? Affinites? Oh, Affinians. Okay, Affinians. There's a lot of Affinians up in Toronto.
Some of our great engineering directors that support customers very much actually come from Nudge.
Heck yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So today we're going to talk about a little bit what leading VC firms do in terms of building out their operating platform. Casey and Dan are going to share some of the custom use cases that they've enabled for their firms and built and integrated with Affinity. They're going to share the deep details of their tech stacks, not in too much detail, but just enough for you to get a good idea of how you might get started or some interesting ideas for new tools that you might not have heard of before. And finally, I'm going to share Affinity's API outlook, what's coming next. And if you stick around to the end, you'll also have a QR code with access to great resources that Dan and Casey have agreed to share. So our most sophisticated customers leverage Affinity alongside their internal tools to enhance their firm's overall operating platform. On the bottom left, you can see that Affinity is the source of truth of people, companies, investor, and relationships with them, and the firm's deal pipelines. Those are some of our product capabilities that we try and build in and make easily accessible to you. And on the bottom right, these firms might have in-house apps reporting layer, as well as third-party data sets that they've purchased. They often have their own data stores. We'll hear here that there's, that we'll take advantage of Postgres. We might even take advantage of Airtable, so it can be absolutely anything. And with that, on the top, they enable all of these different use cases, portfolio support, deal flow, sourcing deals, and enhancing their firm's overall performance. So during this session, Dan's going to highlight the way that SpeedInvest uses this model to provide exceptional portfolio company support. And Casey's going to focus on OMER's applications to optimize deal flow with better decisions with data. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dan.
Thanks. So I joined SpeedInvest about a year ago, and before that, we'd been using Notion pages to get information to our portfolio companies, which was a private place where we could talk to them. But it wasn't really branded, and it didn't have a lot of capabilities that we were looking for. So we wanted to find a different solution. And so we embarked on building a portal for founders. The main use case we have in mind for this portal is to help our portcos get warm introductions to the many people that we know and communicate with as a company. As I said before, we're a big enough company. We've got 35 investment managers, and not all of them know everybody else's contacts. And so having something online where the portcos can come and say, okay, we're looking for a new customer, we're looking for a new investor, we're looking for an expert who can help us with some consulting. This is what the online service is really geared to do. It does have some other things as well, but that's the main thing. Yeah. And so the next use case will be coming soon. After a quote. I'll just read the quote to you. The quote says, I wish I had this list of VCs a year ago. That's somebody who had already raised their Series A. And so awesome, right? So this is what we love to hear. This was real affirmation for us that we were building the right thing. As I said before, introductions are really the bread and butter of what we're talking about. We have a KPI for our company to make introductions to our portcos. And while Affinity does offer introductions out of the box, we wanted a bit more than what Affinity could do. As I said before, we do different types of introductions, whether it's for customers or investors or experts. We sometimes make introductions to other portcos or our LPs. It helps us to understand what kinds of introductions we're doing. So we built this, and I'll talk about how we did that later, to classify the different kinds of introductions so we can see what they are. And then the other thing we want to do is not just talk about the quantity of introductions, but the quality of introductions. And so we call that game-changing introductions, where a person can go and manually mark an introduction as having a big impact on the portfolio company. That could be hiring a new C-level executive, could be finding the new investor for their to lead their Series A round, that kind of thing, where we want to encourage people to brag about what they do and share that information around the company as best practices, and hopefully even share it outside the company in our marketing materials. So this is about sharing inside the company, right? I'm looking to see what other game-changing introductions are happening around the company. The thing we're working on now is bringing financial data into Affinity. So we have a financial reporting system that we use that keeps track of a few different pieces of information that are really useful to specific teams at SpeedInvest, and we want to empower them to use this information in their CRM operations. So, for example, the fundraising team wants to know, well, how much has this investor committed to us in the past? Is that commitment rate going up or down over time? Or if they're going to speak at a conference or go to a conference, they want to know, okay, how many UK-based investors were investing or committed at least 5 million to our last major core fund? These are kinds of things that Affinity is great at if it has the data. And so we're working on getting that data in there now. And then on the portfolio support side, we've got 300 portfolio companies in total, and keeping track of all of those and understanding which companies are having good performance, which companies are having bad performance, and then acting accordingly is what we want to get out of this. So it's prioritization of our proactive portfolio support capabilities there.
So we've been on a similar arc, I think, to the industry. In that we implemented Affinity in 2019. It was the first sort of like major system when we kicked out our broken Salesforce instance and put Affinity in. Around that time, if you can remember, data-driven sourcing was kind of all the rage. And so we spent a lot of time focusing on finding new companies, and initially, started just sort of sending Excel sheets out to the investors. That got a little bit awkward in terms of let's be real, the investors weren't doing anything about the leads we were sending. So we realized we needed more of a workflow. And so we started, that was sort of the genesis of us building our internal web app, which we now affectionately refer to as the Discovery platform. We're space nerds, so like Discovery, the space shuttle. and OV in the middle is Omer's Ventures. I'm obligated to explain that. My marketing team told me I have to tell you why. And honestly, we've been on a bit of a journey over the last 4 years we call ourselves sort of like the Excel killers. If there's a process or a workflow that's based in Excel or an email, we got to put it into the product. And again, this is me showing my roots as sort of like a consumer-facing digital director. That I wanted to look pretty, and we'll get into the tech stack in a second, but it's easy, easier than ever before to build a nice light little app. And so it was really important, though, for us that it ties directly into Affinity. So we're heavy users of the Affinity API. All of the companies or the people referenced inside the Discovery platform use the Affinity ID. I just outsourced the entity recognition to Affinity. And everything, when we're collecting data as part of these workflows, we're more often than not pushing it back into Affinity, either updating fields or putting discrete notes attached to the company. And yeah, we find having it's sort of like Affinity does all the hard work that never build a CRM. I would never build a CRM. And so we're sort of like the high value thin layer on top of a lot of the Affinity data, and we really use this as a way to keep us all internally accountable for the workflows and investors accountable to the workflows that we need from them. So it's like right in your face, we need you to tag this company, or we want to understand what happened at the last board meeting. And so that's our Discovery platform. An example of that is we've had various different like post management presentation surveys over the years. Basically, like when a founding team comes in to pitch the firm, not the first meeting, but firm wide, everybody who's in the meeting gets a link to the Discovery platform. So Affinity sort of like recognizes that we had a management presentation, knows who was there, triggers an email send. And then we have everybody who's in the room, from the GP to principals, associates, ops, everybody, answer a series of questions, both qualitative, what are the sort of pros and cons of this investment, what advice would you like to give to the team, and then also quantitative. So how do we rank the team, the founding member? Do we like the industry? And again, heavily leveraging the Affinity API, and then also pushing data back into Affinity. But I think if I can leave you with one thing, it's that if it's not in a system and if it's not in a workflow, it's always going to be best efforts to get it done, which means it's probably not going to be done with any level of consistency.
And why is it important to have everybody submit that survey or complete that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for my purposes, so two main points. One, it's good to just give everybody a voice who was in there and surface all this data. I mean, we do probably like you guys, we'll have an hour presentation and we have like a half-hour debrief, but like we all know who talks in the debriefs, and we think there's gold in the minds of people who are there, and it's good to get multiple opinions out. And we find the survey is really good. I mean, the other thing, to be honest, too, is we do better deals. So we like to think we make better decisions because the deal team has a more informed mind about all the different opinions. And I guess the third thing would be we don't talk about it as much, but like evaluating the decision-making ability of the individual investors. So it's like, hey, you can't give everything a 5, or maybe, anyways, it's just another data point that we can use to evaluate ourselves and make better decisions ultimately.
As you can see, our customers enable a wide variety of use cases, and they both actually do very different things on top of Affinity. I particularly like how you use deal surveys to drive better decision-making, but also more inclusive decision-making by ensuring that everybody's voice gets considered. And Speed Invest prioritizing portfolio expert using the financial data and thinking through making the financial data available to your internal users for making those decisions. And so now that we've covered these use cases and you have a good sense of how and what they're providing their internal and external users, let's dive into the tech stacks behind these, starting with Speed Invest Portal for Founders.
Yeah, when we were thinking about how to build this portal that I outlined to you before, we started with the front end and worked backwards. You might have heard that phrase before. And the front end that we chose is a low-code front end called Softer. And we like its balance between how flexible it is and which allows us to, get what we want it to look like, and also the speed that we can develop it. So our development cycles are usually less than a day in terms of bringing out a major new capability or page on that. And that pretty much pulled through the next layers, because at the time they really emphasized Airtable as their primary or preferred data source. So we went with Airtable. We were already using Airtable, but now we use it quite a lot more. And so, yeah, that's kind of the core of our tech stack. And then we feed data from Affinity into Airtable. So we need to come up with a way to feed data from Affinity into Airtable. And that was a bit of a challenge because there's so many choices out there, really. That was the biggest challenge. So I started to evaluate a few and didn't really think that they fulfilled the promise of a low code or no configuration approach. So instead, I just used Google Apps Script, which was really easy. You don't need a PO to get started. It's free. And it works pretty well. It's got its own integrated development environment, which is pretty friendly. There's really good documentation because there's so many users out there. So this was a really nice kind of set of training wheels for us to get going. This was what we launched with. It was moving about 5,000 items out of Affinity each day from various lists into Airtable, and then those got published via the software web. Sometimes it fell over and broke, right? Because this was code I wrote, and I'm not a software developer. But that's okay. That just meant that, the code or the data might be stale for a day or two. And for our use cases, that was totally acceptable. So this was a really lightweight way to get started. As I mentioned here, there's also some HR data coming in there. Like we, for instance, needed to know who the employees of Speed Invest were. And the easiest way to do that would be to use the most current authoritative place, which is Personio in our case, not in Affinity. And then Getro is our talent pool data as well. So that's everything that's going on here. It was used by both portcos and investment managers, and that's everything that's in this diagram. The next page talks about what we did to add those introductions where I talked about before, like tagging the introductions with different types and getting that flowing. This required a lot more data. So we actually outgrew our Google Apps Script pipeline at this stage. And I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide about what we're using now. And so, yeah, the key point to make here is we're now doing some more sophisticated processing, which is in Postgres, which does that tagging of the type of introduction according to which Affinity lists this person is a member of, which was really handy and useful. And then it does some filtering and then loads it up into Airtable.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you set up your list? Because I think it's a pretty great way to just have a way to know where the introduction is coming from.
Yeah, or maybe I'll try to answer your question by saying what lists we have. So we have an LP list. We have a EU investors list, which is pretty much a data dump from Dealroom. Anybody who's invested in anything in Europe. We have an experts list, which is one we curate by ourselves. And then I think that's it. We also do a little bit of domain matching for the investors, right? So we might not know everybody at Atomico, but we know the domain at Atomico, so we do some of that. So yeah, we needed a pipeline that could move faster, and this is something that it would have been great to have known up front to just throw out some of the existing ones, although we haven't tried what they use at Omer's, so maybe that would have been a better choice. We tried two that were known to be high scale and fast, and we found them to be not really high scale and not really fast and still needed a lot of configuration. So instead of trying to learn their system, which was a relatively small pool of technologies, we started to choose just off-the-shelf stuff that's super familiar and recognizable to anybody who's like working with a command line, and a lot of software engineers should be able to work with this stuff. And so yeah, this is all really bog standard stuff. It's not going to impress anybody who is building software these days, but that's because it's 10 to 20 years old technology that just works and doesn't change that much. So we found that to be really helpful. And then the two things we wrote, which are now open source and available to you and will be linked in the resources, are two Python scripts that help us work with Affinity data. The first one does all of the API calls. It does the authentication, the pagination, retry, those things that just kind of you need to get the full data set out of Affinity easily. So that's the first one. The second one translates Affinity's JSON format into convenient CSV format, which these tabular systems like Airtable or Postgres are ready for. So both of those we use in multiple times throughout our pipeline for each list that we're extracting, and hopefully it'll be useful to you guys as well.
Can you tell us a little bit more just before you move on about how you're like your staff? I think you have one person supporting you. How did you get started?
Yeah, well, we got started with just me. And so, yeah, our code wasn't great. Now we have a part-time freelance developer, full-stack developer who's really helpful. And that's it. That's all we're working with now. And we're actually finding that that's pretty great. They can do some customization of the front end, like if we need different CSS or if we need to have like just a little bit more integrations. And also the person has done a lot of help on that data pipelines as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think similar to you, Dan, it was just me for a long time. And I think this is a very highfalutin looking tech stack. But the reality is, we started out with Affinity, and then I was using Zapier to push and pull stuff in and out of Airtable. And you can go a long way with that. And that's okay. And at some point, it's actually funny. I'm sort of the no code expert, and the one developer on my team is the Python data science PhD, like super brain guy. And we're always sort of like pushing and pulling a little bit. Like he's like, oh, that's just stupid. I could just do a join. I'm like, no, I know, but you can't do that in no code. And so we've come to sort of in the middle of like, sometimes it's just really nice to use a no code tool because you can see the business logic really clearly. You know what it's doing. You don't have a lot of the sort of like hangover of code, but we're at a point now where we're sort of like 50-50. I think we are decidedly Python nerds. So I'm, whenever we are doing scripts, it is Python. And we've matured a little bit, I think, as we've added more functionality to the point where, right now we kind of have two, if you go sort of top of the stack there, we have two main sort of panes of glass at all time. One is Affinity for a lot of our contacts and who are we meeting with and deals and that kind of stuff. And then our discovery platform is really a lot of the, whenever we need to show a data point or get an action or drive a workflow, it's in Discovery. And it's a great time to be building internal web apps. We had looked at Retool and a couple others and decided, we're just weird enough being a Canadian pension fund and some weird requirements that we wanted to code it ourselves. And my PhD actually used to run the website at his college radio station. So I'm like, hey man, do you want to try and just like do a front end? And he said, great. And he showed it to me and it looked absolutely terrible. And then I said, okay, well, you're clearly not a design. And then you realize, okay, well, there are frameworks out there. So we use Tailwind CSS to do a lot of the styling on the CSS. We have themes that we use. And honestly, with Vue.js and then using sort of like AG Grid and high charts, you can build an app that looks really good. And a lot of the sort of like difficulties abstracted. Anyway, I could talk about front ends forever. That's not why we're here. So two front ends, pushing and pulling data using the API, and then being Python nerds, we used to use Airflow to sort of orchestrate our scripts. Well, sorry, we used to do like cron jobs and stuff on the local machine, and then Airflow. And then we realized that we like Prefect just for sort of like launching our Python scripts. And that's everything from sort of pushing and pulling data out of third-party sources into databases to, we've fully modeled out our fund from a portfolio KPI perspective and from an investment perspective. So we've got the sort of stack from top to bottom, and Affinity is obviously a big part of that.
And can you talk a little bit about why you use both Airtable and Postgres? Yeah.
Part of it's me, part of it's I just love building databases in Airtable. To be honest, it's when you really get into it, Airtable is kind of like if Google Sheets and a database had a baby. I think is the best way to describe it. And you are creating a relational database without knowing it. And so it's easy for even though we could build it in Postgres, if it's not going to have a lot of records, it's just easier to have the business logic like in a no-code kind of tool. And it also has a self-publishing API that's awesome. So
it's great. To hear that you're still using it even though you have access to something more more challenging to use that maybe is more flexible, that means that getting started there actually is a really great place if you need to end up modifying in some way.
I think we're at the point too where like if we were going to build a new database, I'd still kind of build it in Airtable. The one sort of like trick I found is like, because every Airtable, every database starts with just a blank sheet of paper, and so you sort of build as you go. And I think maybe I'm just not smart enough to intellectualize my way to what the end database is going to be. I need real data, not fake data, and I need actual users to sort of feed off of. So Airtable is a great way to be like, let's just start with one part of the business that we want to model, get it into Airtable, structure it, like take advantage of some of the power of like that the database can do, and then get it into a front end as soon as possible. So like shorten that time to value. Because our investors are smart, but I find they have maybe a lack of imagination from a product standpoint. So you just got to kind of get it in front of them, and then you get the feedback. So
one thing to that. So Airtable has been great for us because our team doesn't have deep database engineering skills. They might be comfortable writing a couple SQL queries, but not a lot. And what we've been able to do with Airtable is bring in more people to the project. And so we might have an owner for the talent data, and they can do everything they need to do to affect the data part of the experience just with Airtable. Or we've got another person who owns a different chunk of the experience. And so that really helps us as a team work effectively together, rather than always having to go through like a SQL expert to get anything done.
It's a really great way to get started. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, like I see Ryan here. You do sort of like public markets, kind of laughing at the private markets. Like private markets, I mean, we're 12 years old as a fund, and we've maybe done 480 transactions. Like, so it's not, these tables aren't deep, but they're excessively wide. So there are lots of properties hanging off of these things. So which naturally lends itself to an Airtable kind of solution. And so just as an example of something we're doing. We're pushing and pulling data all the time in and out of Affinity. And we're big users of Affinity's webhook. So we've built a little list in our app, but it's just, attentively listening to every webhook that Affinity throws out. You throw a lot our way because we're pretty active. And then it routes to different Python flows in Prefect, depending on what we needed to do. And an example would be like location. So one of the biggest issues we have is we have a very specific view of the world, or at least North America, in terms of like, Cupertino, San Jose. It's just the Bay Area. We just want to see it all as the Bay Area. Brampton, Scarborough, I'm going to use some Toronto references. It's just Toronto, Anybody from London here, from the UK? Okay, yeah, sorry, man. We now lump Oxford and Cambridge into London, which is whoa, all right. The thought being, if we're going to fly to London, we can see any of these companies. And you can't analyze stuff if it's like, there's like 75 countries, towns in the Bay Area, so we just need Bay Area. Played around with AI, tried to, do different things. And actually, as part of the resources at the end, we'll show you how we ended up solving it. The highlight is basically we used polygons. If anybody knows the KML map, so polygons on a map, and we get the coordinates of whatever city it is. We locate that in the center of the polygon, and then we use a little bit of like Python math, geomath to sort of say, yep, you're Bay Area. We'll give you the scripts and everything. It's actually like
This is a non-developer here doing a great job.
Yeah. It's just one of those, like, everybody's talking about LLMs and AI, and I'm like, sometimes like 30 lines of Python can just do it. Anyways, long story short, yes. So we now, whenever a new company is added to Affinity, it wakes up, we do our little Python-y magic, and then we push back down to Affinity that this company is, its OV location, as we call it, is Bay Area or Toronto or DC. Oh, yeah. Hey, super good plug for the V2 of the API. So we have a product where I don't know if I should be telling you guys we're doing this, but I think maybe most people did. I don't know. We're all friends in the industry. And we have certain VCs that we look up to, and certain VCs that, like, if you do a C deal, we kind of want to know about it, and if you do a Series A, we're going to feel real bad about ourselves. But we don't. You only know what you look at. So we have a process where once a week we're looking at all deals done by certain VCs that we look up to, and for any of the deals that are in the sort of area of investment that we're interested in, we pipe it through the system where we get in front of the investors and we're like, hey, is this regrettable or not regrettable? And if so, like, why didn't we see it? Should we reach out? And so as part of that, we do as much pre-processing of the data as we can. And one of the important things that we do is we say, we can tell, we have the data in Affinity, like, did we see this? Were we talking to this company with, the 9 months preceding the deal getting done? And previously, that on V1 that was non-trivial amount of API calls. Like it was 16,000, it ripped through our whole prospect list and da-da-da-da-da. And now with V2, we've just set up a view on our prospects list, which is it just filters out companies that we've seen in the last 9 months. And so what's great about V2 is you can hit that specific view. So like within a list, in a view, just return the data that that view is showing on the front end, and only the columns that are present, which is fantastic. So what used to take thousands of calls now takes 1 or 2 calls, and then we push that through. So what's really cool, just beyond this use case, is we finally have the ability of we can configure a query on the front end, which is nice, and then also the front end and the API are both singing the same tune in terms of the data that they return. So congratulations on that one. That was a good one.
I don't know. I think that's still step one. So I think that's a great transition to the outlook for Affinity's API. We heard some great insights about how firms are integrating with Affinity across their databases and workflows. But as you've seen, some of them are doing with brute force solutions, relying on our V1 API, a lot of extra lines of code in some cases in order to be able to really filter and go through and comb through and make all of the updates that are required, which requires extra technical expertise, although sounds like you got started pretty easily and have now gotten to the path that you're in here. And our goal at Affinity is to change that, making it easier for you to expand and unlock even more value without having to have all of that expertise. And so we plan, you heard earlier today, easier integration and access to Affinity data is one of the most important parts of Nail the Basics, or maybe it's theme 3. I'm going to say as an engineer, it's the most important part. We plan to do this by enabling seamless data synchronization with two-way APIs, chatting with a lot of customers. A lot of them are starting to build their own internal data platforms because there's so much data that you need access to when you're making important decisions. And what I've heard is a couple things. One is they want to bring Affinity CRM data to use within their own data platform so that they have access to that data if they're doing their own reporting, if they're starting to use AI because they do have their own insights, or they want to be able to do all sorts of other use cases. And they also want to take the results from that platform and the analytics that they might have built out and move it back into Affinity so that Affinity can keep being the source of truth, but then also make it more easily available within all of the workflows. The other thing that we've heard from firms of all sizes is that they really want the ability to create custom, flexible workflow integrations, and they want to be able to do that both by off-the-shelf automation tools like Zapier, or by using the API if they need to do something a little bit more available. And so regardless of where you're at, you should be able to take advantage of this to be able to build some of the custom workflows that you'd like. And then finally, because not everybody has dedicated engineering resources, and even if you do, it's nice when you can just configure something out of the box, more out-of-the-box integrations. So building it out in such a way that it's easier to add more and more quickly to Affinity. Because I know that not everybody here has access to a Dan or a Casey. In some cases you also have this role, but makes it possible also sometimes for users to configure their own integrations, which I know can be really helpful. So our customers have also expressed a need for more user-friendly APIs. So earlier this year, Casey mentioned, we released our first version of V2 that makes it possible to read and extract information about organizations and people from Affinity. The key thing that's different about these and what you're going to be seeing from our APIs moving forward is that they are much more intuitive. The API schema more infers the actual data that you're interacting with from within Affinity. They're more performant and scalable, so we have bulk endpoints so that you don't have to go and do something on a one-off. It's actually designed for your use case for synchronization. And that means reducing the number of API calls and makes it way faster to sync with us. And then finally, they have detailed documentation with code examples. And fun fact, this is something that I'm enforcing internally at Affinity. So when we build internally for our own use cases, we document every single endpoint that we build. And that's what you eventually end up using. So we're not just doing it for you, we're doing it for ourselves in order to go faster. Thank you. Faster. Yeah, faster with the really slow clicker. And so moving forward, we want to make it really easy to extract, create, and extend our product capabilities, which does mean, obviously, writing, the very obvious thing. So I've heard it many times. Writing field data will be coming. Merging duplicate people. We're doing a lot of work to improve our duplicate management, where actually, before we even get to APIs, we're starting with identifying duplicates more successfully, bringing that into the UI, and with everything we build, we're going to make it possible to then extend that in bulk via the API, so that you can merge duplicates in bulk on the API. Search, filtering, creating richly formatted notes. So we're going to be changing how we store our notes to actually make it possible to do this via the API, retrieving interactions in bulk, and to create them from other platforms. So this is everything that we've heard. Maybe before I get ahead of myself, here's what we're planning for 2025. If I can get to the next slide so that you can still see. The third theme that you heard was nail the basics specifically this year. We're not going to stop after this year, to be clear. This is very much how we operate from now on. What we build internally is what we want to make available to you as we hear about what you want to build along with our product capabilities. And so in the coming year, what's in yellow here is in 2025, writing field data, deduplicating people in bulk, so making it really easy to merge, syncing richly formatted notes, so writing, creating them, managing them, as well as retrieving important and importing interactions from other platforms. And so we're going to improve the interactions API, make it possible to support different types, and make it possible to just do all of these things with very high quality in a reliable way designed for consumers. And then that wraps up our official talk. Thank you for your time today. Thanks, Dan and Casey.